Alright, so I'm back. I'm back and I'm trying to review. Got a lot going on in here. Trying to review more pieces of artwork, at least concept art or whatever I can find from Infinite Uppercut. Okay, so this was this was the oven. I got inspired by the pit from Mortal Kombat. I also got inspired by God, I wish I remember the name of the stage, but it was from the game War Gods. I can't remember the name of it, but I used that and like I said, the pit from MK as inspiration. The perspective of this is god awful too. Yeah, I don't know what's going on in the center platform, but I ended up doing another one that was here. Then I drew it from a different angle this time. As you can see, like I've said in the last video, like every environment that I drew, I had the thought process of fitting everything in like it was a fighting game. So like every environment on my comic or in my comic is like a fighting game stage. And my thought here was like the pit in MK. So you have fighter here and fighter here, and someone gets knocked off the edge. I feel like John Madden. And when they get knocked off the edge, they fall into the toaster oven essentially that's surrounding the platform, either knocked all the way to the sides or down at the bottom. As ridiculous as that is, there's never a reason explained in my comic as to why it's a toaster oven. It just is. There's a lot of things in my comic that doesn't have explanation as far as how things run. And the characters are just as lost and confused as why things are the way they are as the reader is, which is sort of the running joke of the comic itself. Nobody understands why things are happening the way they happen. But yeah, this was the oven. I wonder if I can find any do I even have like concept sketch of this? Nope, I honestly can't find the original sketch of this stage. So stage environment. So that's actually out. Spoilers from the story, but y'all will be alright. This was an example of a character actually being knocked off the platform in the oven. So this was them sort of falling off the side. What happens next, leave to your imagination. I would appreciate it if you read the comic to find out what happened next, but this is just an image of that tumble in that stage. Like I say, it still bothers me that I did this comic in Photoshop instead of Clip Studio, but I'll get over it. I still love this comic to death. Speaking of ridiculous, so this was the laboratory. Had a character in here that was pretty much made solely for one other character in this environment. They kind of had no other purpose. I sort of stretched their usefulness out as long as I possibly could. This guy was a fighter and a scientist, and he actually did experiment on a young woman who is obsessed with video games to the extent that she would come into this quote unquote arcade to sort of play video games all the time. And to play these games, this is so messed up. This is so wrong, especially when it comes to like consent and whatnot. But like, he would do experiments and tests on her in order to allow her to play games. And this is the female character in question. And due to her experiments, she became this. Her name is Kanzi Cake. Needed a ridiculous name, so I just picked like the nicknames of my grandparents and threw it on her. But yeah, this was her possessed side that came from all the experiments done that rears its ugly head at one point. But this is her normally, without like a game device of some sort in her hands that she's carrying like all the time. I pretty much got used to drawing her playing a game or holding some type of handheld device or something in her hand the entire time. So yeah, that was the laboratory. I really liked the way that this environment looked. The how it came out was perfect to me. Though this bottom, if there's anything that I regret from this bottom texture got really tedious in the comic, and at some points, I'm not even gonna lie, I forgot to even put it in there. I'm not even gonna lie to you. It got so tedious, and then on certain occasions, just trying to get it done, I forgot all about this part down here, the little texture on it. And a lot of this can be chronicled in the playlist. I should have it pop up somewhere during this video, maybe at the end of my 100 days of making comics challenge that I did last year. So yeah, there was actually a lot of drawing of this stage of the comic during that time frame. This was the Space Grounds. Once again, another excuse for me to use a bunch of like stars and neon lights in my comic. Though the actual neon light part of this stage isn't shown as much just because the stage takes place in daylight. I didn't get to run with this one as much as I did the other stages just because, like I said, it's in the daytime. I still love it. This was probably my favorite environment to draw stuff in the story. And it's just because of the colors. There's no other reason. And I also wanted the stage to sort of look like a temple. That's why I had this behind the giant yin-yang symbol. I don't know why I had so many yin-yang symbols in this story too. There's 2 in this environment alone. So I don't know what was up with that. Alright, sorry about that. Sounded like a FedEx truck was about to crash outside. Alright, it was a FedEx truck. What does a FedEx truck sound like? Anyways, don't pay me any attention. Genie Nizu. This was the god of my story, essentially, just for lack of a better term. Inspiration for this character was, I thought about Krillin from Dragon Ball Z. I thought about Charlie Brown, of all people and characters. And the Eternal Champion from the game Eternal Champion. He was a big inspiration, like trying to take Charlie Brown and or take the Eternal Champion and shrink him down into some weird Charlie Brown-like god figure. And he's pretty ridiculous as well. The whole purpose of my story was around a tournament between 2 warring worlds, but they're only like fighting in this tournament or whatever because he's bored and he just wants to be entertained, so he just like makes them fight. That's pretty much the story. Like, he just wants entertainment, so he creates a fighting tournament because martial arts tournaments solve everything. That was yet another tip of the nod of fighting games, by the way. Just a little not so subtle way for me to mock the fact that in all fighting games, it's some crazy like fight to save the world story that can only be solved in a martial arts tournament. As ridiculous as that is. But yeah, he's completely ridiculous. One of my favorite characters in the story to sort of like write for and to draw, just because he looked so unique. And shading him, I never could, because of the way he looks, I could never shade him in a typical fashion like I would any other character, because he's always like glowing in a sense. In this particular image, I don't have any of like his power or anything like that showing, so you can't tell. And I currently can't find another piece of artwork off the top of my head to show you to illustrate that point. Okay. 2 birds with 1 stone. Alright, here's the environment in question, the Space Grounds. And this was the character himself, so piecing everything together in the same spot. Dan. Another favorite character of mine to work on. I love pretty much all my characters, but I'm not gonna lie, there was some that I liked working on more than others. This is gonna sound stupid considering that my entire story was intentionally drawn as one big giant joke that none of the characters are really in on. But despite the circumstances, Dan was my comic relief. And I named him Dan Van Damme. Van Damme just because of Jean-Claude Van Damme, and one of my favorite pro wrestlers was Rob Van Dam as a kid. It's also why he has a ponytail. I believe the original design for Dan did not have a ponytail, if I can even find it. I don't know why I'm struggling so much with actually finding like sketch art right now. It's kind of pissing me off. So yeah, this was, God, that's a hairstyle that I'm using in my current comic. I just realized this. This design was the one that I went with, and it pretty much is Dan right here. This is sort of him with the hood on, kind of, sort of. I just made it long sleeve, but they're pretty much the same designs anyways. It just doesn't have the take fist. It's one of the rare characters, by the way, that I didn't give gloves or gauntlets to. I gave take fists as well. Had I thought more of it about Dan Hibiki from Street Fighter, I would have never named this character Dan in the first place, because he shares the same name of another comic relief character in a fighting game. I wasn't thinking about that. I was in way too deep in Infinite Uppercut by the time I realized it. But outside the fact that they're both complete jokes, like there's nothing really in common between the two. Like this character, even comparing him to Dan is ridiculous. Like this character is so not to be taken seriously. Like I think most of the humor, like I said before, my humor in general is very, very dry because I'm not ha-ha funny. I stayed away from putting jokes like that in my story because they just wouldn't click. No one would find them funny. However, most of the gag jokes in my story involve Dan here, because he was literally the only character that I could pull stuff like that off with. Sort of made me stretch my humor just a tad bit, so the entire comic is not just one long, dry ordeal, I guess. My last character this was actually the real villain of the story. I was about to do quotations, but it's like that would have been wrong because he really is like the final boss of the game. The game, oh my god, I so wish this was a video game. But no, the final boss of the comic. Yeah, this was Val Priest. I don't think I have any sketches for Val though. I could be wrong, but I'm almost positive that I don't. I do. I'm actually shocked by that because I kind of had an idea of what I wanted his design to look like. Once again, this weird Shao Kahn-esque design in the center that looks awful. I don't know why I just kept doing that. The weird pads and I don't know. I'm trying to look at the difference between these two on the ends here. They look exactly the same. Okay, I see. This one here looks like it has more detail, but it doesn't. It's more like a form-fitting upper body gear here. And then I had the weird gemstones and stuff around his belt. Here, there wasn't anything in the upper body. But it was also a weird belt. And then these, I don't know if he had sleeves underneath the gloves. Like, I don't know what that was about. Just doing too much, just trying to see what would work. But yeah, the design on the far right is the one that I eventually went with. And I rarely ever drew this character smiling. He pretty much had this expression like 90% of the story. Also, this was the character that was almost the most like my voice in the story. Because it had to be like the most meta character in the story. Outside of my main character, like I don't even know if this was a connection that was ever made through anybody reading the story, but I intentionally kept the personalities of the main villain and the hero. Like the main protagonist and antagonist of the story sort of had the same personalities. They were the only two characters that were really balanced in using sound judgment of all of the characters in my story. I actually had to I was writing so much of Val through my own perspective at times that I had to sort of remember to make him do dastardly things so that you go, okay, this is the villain. It's like I don't need it. You're gonna kind of feel sorry for the character just because of the circumstances of the story, but it's like I don't need you feeling sorry for him at all at any point, or not too much so. You're going to just because of the stupidity that's around him. But yeah, that was sort of why I did little stuff like the very first page, or first pages, the first set of pages of the story was him blowing the main character's head off. Just a fireball straight to the face while he was on the toilet, because why not? Very crass humor, but I just wanted to throw that in there just so there were no illusions as to what kind of story you were about to start reading here. So that's like the first like 2 or 3 pages of the comic. So yeah, that was sort of how I introduced Val into the story. Like I said, a super serious face. It's also weird to look back at too. My art style sort of changed. This was because I'm looking at the amount of line shade. It actually bothers me now. In trying to figure out how I wanted my artwork to look in general, I got in this phase where I intentionally let my artwork look sloppy, like on purpose. I just like the crude way in which I would just take a basic brush with like sort of low opacity and just shade lines all over the artwork. Just to give you an example of a picture, I drew a picture of Roman Reigns with this sort of style, sort of sloppily done, but it's weird, like it's off, but it fits. I don't know why, the weird way in which I shaded sort of fit. But in a comic, it's so off-putting, which is why at a certain point I stopped doing it in the comic and I started shading with like just regular color again, which is what I was doing before. It just didn't look right to me when I did it before. I don't know why it improved my artwork with this comic so much, as if I can even pull up some page examples. And this is why I also always suggest to somebody that's like trying to start a comic, just go ahead and work on the comic, because I don't care who you are or what you do, when you start working on comic books and start making comics, in comparison to what your later work down the line is going to look like, it's always going to be bad, because you're going to figure out new things, you're going to learn, you're going to get better. It's a million things are going to change over time. So this is an early example of a page down here. Once again, that weird sort of shading taking place. And then if I can find a later page, much cleaner, when I just use basic colors. well, not basic colors, I shouldn't even say it, solid colors. Like it's just one uniform. Here is just like all the different, like I said, you can tell I went over the color with the low opacity brush numerous times because it's clearly like, God, this just looks so much better to me. I could be wrong, just harshly criticizing my own artwork, but I just love the progression of the art over time. But that's just me. What am I talking about?